We've got a bunch of folks who are joining, so we'll just give them a couple of minutes to get settled. Bob, are you able to see the live stream over on Facebook? It's okay if not.
I do not see it right now.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, we've got a good audience tonight. Welcome, welcome. I see some familiar names. It's nice to see you all again. Hey, Robert, go ahead and stop your screen share for the moment. I got a couple little housekeeping things to do ahead of time.
Go for it. See if I can make it stop.
You're okay. We can also just talk over it.
It's fine.
Are we mute? All right. We have almost 100 folks joining us tonight from all over Texas, which is really exciting, and even a couple of folks outside of Texas. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get us started so that we can move on with seeing these excellent presentations, which I'm very excited about. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for joining us for tonight's virtual event, The Painted Churches of Texas Part 2, Community and Preservation. Some of you folks probably joined us for Part 1 back in April, I think it was. So we're following up with a Part 2 because there were a lot of questions that came out of that initial virtual event and a lot of interest. And so we thought, you know what, we've got so much to talk about on this subject. Let's do another one and bring in some professionals who've been working in the field and have a lot of experience to share. So I'm Christy Peliquin. I'm the development manager for the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. We're so glad that you've stopped by, and I want to encourage you all to get to know a little bit more about the work that we do here at the Friends. So please do check out our website at thcfriends.org. I'll drop that into the chat box here in just a moment. Our mission is to support the Texas Historical Commission in its preservation efforts across the state. And I'd love for you to stop by our What We Do page and check out all the programs that we support here at the Friends. And speaking of support, thank you to all of you who've made donations to support the virtual events programming that we have here. Trust me, every single one of those donations, no matter how small, means the world to us. And we're just so excited to have your support. So thank you. I want to acknowledge our THC commissioners, Friends board members, as well as some of our colleagues from the Texas Historical Commission who are here with us today. It's always nice to see you all. A whole bunch more folks who are joining, so one second. Okay, if you haven't already followed us on social media, please do. We would love to connect with you. And this is also a good way to find out about future programming, such as our next virtual event, which is happening on August 31st. It's going to be called Crossing Borders and Cultivating Culture, Exploring the Movement of Creole Zydeco Music. And I'm super excited about this one because we're going to be joined by 4-time Grammy Award nominee and Creole Zydeco music historian Sean Ardoin, as well as presenters from the nonprofit Texas Folk Life. So please do join us for that. That's going to be a special event. A few housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's speakers, and one of them is going to be, I can hear an echo. So if you all could mute your microphones, that sure helps me. Great, that's so helpful. Thank you. And then later on when we have a Q&A, if there's an opportunity, I'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask a question if we have time for that. So thank you. Renee, do you have a question? I see that you have a hand up. Maybe that's just an accident. Okay, well, let us know, Renee, if you do have a question. All right, so moving on, so keep microphones on mute. I also want to let you know that after tonight's presentation, I will email you all a link to a recording of tonight's presentation. So if you missed something or you want to rewatch it or you want to forward it to a friend, you'll have that link. And I will also include any additional resources that our presenters might mention, such as books, articles, websites. I'll try to include that in my follow-up email as well. One last thing, we have a Q&A at the end of the presentations, and while the presentations are going on, you can go ahead and put questions into the chat box, and that way we'll have a queue of questions that we can go through once we get to the end of all the presentations. Tonight is a little different because we have 3 presenters. We usually just have 1, but we have 3, and so we're going to allow all 3 of those presentations to go before we do our Q&A. So try to remember your questions or put them in the chat box as we're going along, and we'll just get to them in order as soon as we're able to. Okay, now to introduce tonight's speakers. As a conservator for over 35 years, Robert Alden Marshall's works include restoration of the art of the Federal Tower building in Fair Park, art and domes of several courthouses and Capitol complex buildings, Main Street facades, and the Eisenhower birthplace statue in Denison, Texas, which is very cool. I have seen that.
I remember that.
I was there not too long ago. Okay, so and 8 years ago, R. Alden Marshall and Associates restored the interiors of St. Cyril and Methodius Church in Dubina and St. Mary Church in High Hill, aka the Queen of the Painted Churches. Thank you for being with us, Marshall.
Well, thank you.
I should call you. I think I can call you Robert. We're on first name basis.
Robert's right? Fine. Yes. It's fine.
Okay. Our second presenter this evening is Ed Janecka. Ed Janecka's family helped found Dubina as one of the first Czech settlements in Texas. Judge Janecka was born and raised on a farm in Dubina and grew up attending St. Cyril and Methodius Church. In the 1950s, the exquisite interior stenciling that reflected the Czech heritage of the church's founders was painted over. Judge Janecka remembers seeing the faint outline of the original artwork when he was an altar boy. In the 1980s, he helped lead the renovation work of the church with the entire community coming together to restore the original design. Janecka himself painted the last angel that flies over the altar. His family still attends Mass at the church, and after services, they can visit his great-great-grandparents at the adjacent cemetery. Thank you for being with us tonight, Ed. We appreciate that. More people coming. Wow. We have quite a big audience tonight. And finally, our third speaker is Anthony Head. He's an author who's been writing professionally for more than 30 years, including covering high school basketball in Indiana, politics in Chicago, and the culinary arts in Los Angeles. Now writing from Texas, he authors the Deep End column for AustinMonthly.com and contributes frequently to Texas Monthly and Texas Highways. In the past decade, Anthony has authored and co-authored several books, including Spirit, The Life and Art of Jesse Trevino, and most recently, the best-selling Texas Dives, Enduring Neighborhood Bars of the Lone Star State with Kirk Weedle. He is currently researching painted churches for a forthcoming book on the subject. He lives in San Marcos, Texas with his wife, Michelle, and their 3 country mutts. So thank you, Robert, Ed, and Anthony. And
Thank
so tonight we're going to start with Robert.
Okay.
You want to go ahead, and then we'll move on to Ed, and then we'll wrap up with Anthony. So I turn it over to you, Robert.
I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. Let's see if I can get this to work now. Let's see if that's sharing.
Yep, looks good. Just
Okay, from the beginning. In the beginning, now this work was done during the early 2000s, and then the Church of St. Mary, which is actually the Nativity of the Virgin Mary Church, was back. It started in 2009 and went on through 2010. So anyway, let's get started. One of the first things we do whenever we're going to do a job of this nature is we do research to try to find out what originally was there, what sort of things that they had originally, and what the intent is by the owner to where do they want it restored to. And what we found out in this case, see if I have a pointer in here. Yeah, I got my little pointer here. If you notice this wall right here, it's blank. If you notice this one here, you have bowstone and then you have stencil. And you see faux stone back here. So we use these photographs for exactly this reason. Gives us a lot of information that we wouldn't have otherwise. There are a lot of old faces here that Judge Ed might know. Let's go to the next. Here we go. Yeah, is that it? Yeah, okay. Before the treatments, the church didn't look that bad. Here's St. Mary's ceiling. And if you look at it, it looks pretty good overall. However, close up, you can see a lot of damage. We had a lot of dust, water stains, and moldy, torn canvas, not on the that which was glued to wood that they made the ceiling out of. And if you look closely, let's see, where's my arrow? You can see some white right there where you should be gold leaf. That denotes water damage. You see water damage up here too. Okay, next slide. Here you see some black stain, molding. All of this shows signs of water damage, etc. They replaced the roof before I did this work. I actually told them they had to make sure they had all the major repairs done so that when we started, the work that we did would be saved. One of the things that we found when we're in looking at the churches, here we had something interesting in the archway right here, that white area right there. We had some other things up in here that looked suspicious. So that damage in the arch right here was going to need closer attention to know what was going on there. So as you can see, it didn't look that bad at the start unless you looked closely. Now, all of these areas here that are reflecting back at us, that's actually gold. That's why it's reflective. If you look closely at this, it's dirty. You can't see it as well, but you see the different colors here and here. This is lighter, darker. That's to give a faux vaulted look, when in fact, this is all just a simple arch, but they make it look more dynamic. The artists were very good. Here you can see loose canvas that's torn. So here I talk about it. They gave it a vaulted appearance. You can really see it in this photograph. You can see how much lighter this area is, and it gives it the idea of height, like that's higher than say this area here, when in fact here and here are the same line. You're just looking at an archway, and then you have these arches that are cut into the archway that really help to solidify that effect. Certain areas you see where it's all white, and later on we're going to see that they painted over original detail that was in there, which we will uncover. There's exactly that location right there. You can see the water damage that's here that has to be repaired. There's a molding here, which shows that there's a separation between the ceiling and the wall. And then you have new plaster on the wall. So apparently they had plaster damage and other things, and they plastered over the wall and then just decided to repaint white over everything instead of restoring it. Here I'm doing a test. Everything starts with a test. You want to make sure you're not damaging anything. We started off first with water, then we added a little bit of ammonia to the water, and eventually we ended up working with distilled water and Volpex, which is a detergent that's used in conservation. What's nice about the ammonia, it's simple, non-sudsing ammonia. You use it and ammonia off gases. It doesn't leave any residue. There I am agitating it with a little brush and then blotting it dry. And we find that we're getting dirt and assorted things off of the paint, and we're not pulling any paint off of the ceiling. Later, to try to get the canvas back down to the wood, we injected it with a PVA glue and then used a silicone release paper and an iron, a tacking iron, and ironed the canvas back to the wood. Works very well. Been using that method for decades. The first area we started was in the apse above the altar. We wanted to make sure we got all of that done and got our scaffold out so they could continue having masses. And you can see the condition of the ceiling there. We have the loose canvas, the tears, and then we have smears. It looks as though somebody was up there trying to either glue the canvas back down and smear the dirt, or they were trying to wash it, one of the two. But there we go, a little closer. Now, the work was complicated by the idea that it was at height. And so you're looking about 28 feet above the altar to reach the ceiling in the apse. And then outside of that, in the main body of the church, you have an additional 14 feet. So that made it interesting. And so, like I said, we did the apse area first and then brought the scaffold back out and then built a scaffold that covered the entire ceiling or a certain area of the ceiling that then was a walk-through scaffold so that people could still utilize the church. Here we have some of the workers. Unfortunately, they all had to go back to Mexico, but I really enjoyed working with these fellows. They were artists from a university in San Miguel, and they were into mural painting. And so we used them for quite some years. And, but anyway, this was I think Jose stayed on for another year, but everybody else was let go after this project. The project was, you have to remember, 13 months long where we did this work. Here you can see that we have a layer up here. That's actually a level of the scaffold, and then we're down here on this level of the scaffold working. So it was a pretty major scaffold project as well. There you see a little bit of the scaffold. And they did in fact have services, including weddings, with the scaffold. We were able to get it out fast enough for one person who was really freaking out about their wedding being disrupted. We were able to get it out for hers, and she was extremely happy about that. Here's Sheila. She's on the top platform. Now just imagine this is the top of the apse. That's the ceiling. Here's the reredos and the cross. So she's up here standing right against the ceiling. And she's using a brush and size to get ready for applying gold leaf in the morning. The size needs 12 hours to set up. It took a little less time because of the heat that was up there near the roof, but basically you have an open time and then you apply your gold. There she is again. Yeah, everything's pretty specialized, including the brushes we use. We spend a lot of money on really good brushes. Here she is applying the 23.75 karat gold, which happens to be from Bavaria, August rule. So I wanted the judge to know that. Okay. There was a lot of damaged molding that we had to replace, and gesso and paint, and then we eventually gilted. And here we are skewing the gold. That means after the gold was put on, it has to be pushed into place and then skewed out to make it smooth. There's Sheila wearing some of the gold. The gold is extremely light, so when you break some off and it floats around, it'll stick to people like that. But it's very, I mean, you can't even breathe when you're doing this. So we couldn't have any ventilation fans or anything of that nature while we did that work. So it got pretty hot. You can see each individual square. It's 3 by 3 inches. And we would take half a sheet and put it down. You can see where it overlaps. It's called a flag. And we would come back with our brush, and it's called skewing, which breaks those pieces off. Here's the skewing process happening there. And this person we hired, he is local to LaGrange. And we took him on, and he worked for us for several years. A life-changing event for him, I'd have to say. So there we are. Working 30 feet up against the ceiling above the altar and about 40 in the main sections. We did the apse, and then we moved down the sides of the church. As you can see here, scaffolds going up to start the side over here. We did both of the sides first, and then we moved everything to the middle to finish out. There you can see the work area. We have this level and then another level, and then down here we had some catwalks and basically some walking areas here to handle the walls and the reredos. After all of this work was done, the last step was a clear conservation varnish to cover the work and protect it. Here you can see some of the supplies, the spray bottle and so on. Literally Elmer's glue, which is PVA, mixed with water and alcohol so that we could have a thinned down solution to put behind the canvas. And PVA is a thermoplastic glue. So when it's hardened, when you heat it, it will become tacky again. And that's what we're basically doing, is turning all the canvas into iron-on canvas. And there's the process. Silicone released paper and irons. Literally, we ironed every inch of the interior of the church and then followed up with all the in-painting and touching up of the interior. So we literally were on every square inch of the church. Okay, there were many problems, especially with water leaks that happened in the past. Here we had water percolating through the masonry wall into the archway, which was damaging the plaster. You can see this large crack right here. This is literally protruding from the wall about 3.5 inches. So it left a large void behind there. And we had to figure out how we were going to get that back down to the brick, but also get out all the loose sand that was piled up behind it, keeping it from going back. Also, the problem that we had was that the entire surface had been overpainted by somebody else in a past process. The overpainting that they put on wasn't very skillful and was pretty two-dimensional and didn't look the quality of the original artwork, which you'll see very soon. So here again, you have the crack. Then you have this painting that was suspect. The bricks in the wall behind the plaster also had to be consolidated. So we had a lot of areas where we had to drill holes through the plaster to inject it with a grout to secure the bricks behind the wall or behind the plaster. Here you see that closer up. We also had a problem here in the archway. If anybody knows about construction, this would be your keystone in here, and the keystone is fractured and it's dropping out. You can see it's supposed to be literally a half-inch higher up. The loss of the keystone could cause a major failure in this arch. There's another view. So because of this damage, we actually put up a stronger scaffold, a heavier scaffold that would be able to take falling brick if that in case happened during the repair. Here's a close-up of that damaged area and the mortar that was basically crumbling and falling. Here's some more damage to the plaster. Again, here you can see this is water damage and cracks. The shifting of the church was not helping. The whole foundation had to be addressed by the engineer, and they did a great job. Here you see the apse is literally there. That gap, that's because the apse was sinking away from the church, and the engineer had it set up that it would only fall to a certain point, and then it would start to rest on new piers that were put underneath the church. So literally it would start resting on concrete and piers that were under the church now. This all this overpaint, the date is here, it's 1990 that it was applied. And that's one of our problems we're having, is that we want to find out what the original was, not necessarily what this artist did. Here you can see the cracks are going right through details in the artwork. There we go again, this crack going from the center all the way out to the angel. More water damage. Here behind the plaster we found it had been home for some geckos. Here you can see how large that space is. Once again, you can see I could stick my hand in there easily. So that was all taken off and re-adhered. The brick was consolidated, and then we started the removal of the overpaint on the angels. You can see here, we have it partially removed. You can see the difference in quality of the original painting now. That's the original right there underneath there. That was, I forget when it was painted, like in the 19 teens, I believe. Here you have a before and an after. You can see this is when it's, or during, I should say, not after, but here's before, obviously. a great bit of difference. There you are after. Here's the other angel. You can see we're removing some overpaint and we detected an eye. If you notice, or if you know anything about proportion in artwork, you know that this eye is way too high, and that doesn't make sense there, that eyebrow, and that basically all the features of the face were repositioned. So here's an original eye. Now we're going from that and removing paint slowly, a little bit at a time. We remove the paint. All the overpainting has to come off so that we can really see what we have to work with. Here's an old photograph. It shows the damaged plaster right there. And here we have that showing there. Took a few days to do all of that, obviously. But here we have the damaged plaster. And what we're going to do is we're just going to overpaint where that damaged plaster is once we have the painting uncovered. We have them uncovered, and then we applied the conservation varnish over the work that was done so that it could be protected. Here we have some of the gold leaf. Couldn't be saved when we cleaned, it just came off. No problem for us. We do a lot of gilding. And you can see the dust and dirt that was up there. Remember, there was no air conditioning in the churches way back when, and the windows were open, and we had mud daubers and all sorts of nests inside the church that we had to clean off as well. Here's that test area. Here we have the walls. If you remember that old photograph in the beginning of this lecture, you can see we uncovered that. There it is. Now, other detail was discovered too, but they didn't want to go that far for two reasons: budget, and they were afraid they would start looking too gaudy. Well, that's up to them. So we followed their instruction and only restored this area here, as you'll see in the final photographs at the end. We also cleaned up the woodwork. It's all shellac base, French polish, and so we cleaned it and then put another coat of French polish, which is just a method of applying shellac, sometimes called friction varnishing. So we restored the varnish and then regilt the areas of the altar. You can see the difference in the clarity of the wood after that process. And once again, we just have a lot of dirt. It's a massive area to take care of. We had 9 people working with us for over the course of 13 months. So you just have to think of how much we had to do. A lot of this, we had stubborn stains that were mold related that we ended up cleaning off with hydrogen peroxide. Here you have water damage and rot. This is where some gold leaf molding was supposed to be. There you have some of the molding broken, fractured. That's because of the redimensioning of the wood of the ceiling. As the wood dries out, it shrinks, and so then some of the molding didn't fit anymore and it broke. There's some molding that was damaged by water. There are the mud daubers. They had long since gone, though. Once they had air conditioning in there, they had no way to survive. Here you have more paint uncovered. We literally took off every inch of paint on the entire church wall, on all the church walls. Literally peeling it off as we went. We found that mechanical means of using scalpels and razor blades was the best. We were able to peel off the paint literally in sheets because it didn't adhere to the chalking walls. There's that repair again. Here you can see detail underneath. All of this was restored. Here you see the hydrogen peroxide. That was used when necessary. It was just the household peroxide, 3%. Nothing real strong. Here's some water damage and rotted canvas and wood that we had to deal with. That was all consolidated and the canvas was patched in. Here you have more of that type of damage. Here you can see how this had all rotted, and so that canvas had to be replaced up around that area. Here you have more of the walls. You're starting to see the faux stone come out, which is a neat addition to have return. Here you see water damage around that's actually near the bell tower area. And I'm thinking a lot of this damage from settling and water was the reason that a lot of this was plastered over, and also why it was painted white, because some of it was painted white even before the Vatican II order to paint the churches over the decorations that Judge Ed can talk about in the next lecture. So you can see we worked off ladder on all the walls and scaffold on the ceilings. Everything from the choir loft on down. Here was a surprise that we found. No one knew this existed. And when we started uncovering these walls in this area, we found this highly decorated entry with gold leaf letters with phrases in German that were scripture. Let's continue. You can see how the paint peeled off like this, because the paint, this paint here lost cohesion, and so it jettisoned the new paint that was put on top of it. And that's literally close to about 8 coats of paint on there. That's just peeling up, leaving the original. Here we are recreating the exact same stenciling and design that it once had. And there it is. Even the faux marble molding. Here, this collection box is original. We saved all of the original coatings. It's a great historical piece to have. Here, we're nearing completion. You can see it still has the old lights. We put new lights on. We'll show you those soon. And then here you see the stenciling that was done. Also, all the sculpture, everything was cleaned up and restored. Here we're installing new fixtures that were reclaimed from another church that was being demolished somewhere up in Minnesota. So thank you for your lights. Makes a good addition. Here we're taking down the scaffold. Here we are afterwards. We weren't able to completely 100% remove all the overpainting. However, we figured that the idea of saving the hands and faces and the lamb of the original painting was sufficient for the needs that we had at that time. There's another photo of the after. Here you can see after, the mold is gone and it looks much brighter. And this photograph was actually taken a few weeks ago. So it's 14 years after the fact. Very good.
That is incredible.
That's it. Now I
All
have
right.
something to lead into Judge Ed's thing.
I have to say that adds so much to the story of the church, just seeing all of those pictures. So thank you so much for that.
Certainly. And here's Dubina, St. Cyril and Methodius, getting its ceiling painted back in 2004. And there is after, and there's a younger Judge Ed right there. So we had fun with this. There was a lot of fun restoring the altars and all of the painting. But I wanted to show this as a run-in to Judge Ed's piece. I just have to figure out how I stop the share. There it is. I always lose that button.
Thank
So there
you
we
so
are.
much. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we have many questions and comments, and we'll come back to that during the Q&A. But for now, let's go
Exactly.
ahead and invite Judge Ed to talk a little bit about his experience. Judge Ed, I'll turn it over to you, and I've got some photos here that I can share while you're talking.
Sure, that'd be great. Are we on? I love that. That's cool.
Just
One more.
a little bit of a sound issue, just bear with us. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Does that look good, Bob? Can you see that screen?
Yes, that's very
Okay,
good.
perfect. Thank y'all for being patient with us. Every once in a while, we just have some technical difficulties that we have to get through.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
We're going to do something a little bit different. Let me just start out and tell you a little bit about Dubina. Dubina is the first Czech settlement in Texas, designated by the Texas Historical Commission, of all places. That's not to say that there weren't any Czechs in Texas before this community was started. There was an ample supply of them, but this community was started entirely by a group of people that started, and they came from Moravia. Interesting to note that there are over 1 million people of Czech descent in the state of Texas. And the vast majority of them came from that little section around Frenchstadt there in Moravia. And that's kind of where they all came from. And when these people came over, they came over from what was called Austria-Hungary at that time. A province of Austria-Hungary was Moravia. And they left for a lot of reasons. They were starving to death, and Franz Joseph was always in somebody else's war and whatever. But they finally got over here without going into the details of how they got here. But can you imagine what must have gone through these people's minds when they spent the first night there in Dubina? It was cold, it was sleeting, and they left their warm, comfortable beds in Austria-Hungary. But they survived, they learned about things, and then suddenly summer hit, and the heat just about killed all of them. As a matter of fact, later on, a lot of the people just went back to the Czech Republic or Moravia, or they went up to the north because it was too darn hot down here. But they started prospering, and they learned about farming, and then suddenly the Civil War hit, and these people didn't want to have anything to do with slavery. They were serfs where they were coming from. So they survived the Civil War, and then they started writing letters back to the old country about the wonderfulness of this great country and the freedoms that we have here. So people started coming over in droves, and Dubina was kind of the stopover place for people coming over from Moravia. There in Dubina, you can still see the general stores there. The grits mill is gone, the cotton gin is gone, the sawmills is gone. And there was a huge dance platform down there. And any given night in the 1890s and 1910, there would have been 1,000, maybe 2,000 people down there trying to dance or listening to the governor or somebody of that nature speak. So it was a heck of a place to be. Now, these folks brought their religion with them, And when they first came here, they had an itinerant priest from Frailsburg come by, and he would spend 1 day a month, and they would all come in, and what a joyous occasion it must have been for them to receive Holy Communion and go to Mass, and a chance to visit with everybody too. But they wanted a real church, so they got together and they decided, and they built a church. It was built in 1877. It was knocked down by a hurricane in 1909. Hurricanes weren't named back then, but it was the Vastico hurricane, which really caused an enormous amount of damage. So they immediately started, and they started building a new church. And this was the church that they built, and it was fantastic. They had all these things that they wanted to put in there, and they had a fellow by the name of two fellows. Stocker and Kerr came in and did all of the work inside. As a matter of fact, Stocker and Kerr did the work at St. Mary's also. But St. Mary's in Dubina has an interesting connection, because the folks that started High Hill, they spent a night over, or a week rather, in Dubina on their way to High Hill. But it was just an incredible thing. Everybody was, church was going great. And for whatever reason, in 1952, they painted over everything with two coats. And, when you talk to some of the old timers, you ask them why they did that. And they said, well, the ceilings were starting to, because I think they have kerosene stoves, and it got black and it was ugly and whatever. But you also have to remember, during that period of time, people wanted to get rid of stuff that was old. My mother had a beautiful oak table. She would much rather have a Formica table, because that's what everybody else did. But the reality is that when I was growing up, and I grew up over there in that area, went to school in Dubina, and as an altar boy, the sun hit it just about right. You could see some of the stenciling through the wall, and then later on, I did sundry things, a lot of things that aren't on my resume. I went to Vietnam, went to college, have a couple of degrees, and got married, and we moved back. And this was in the early 80s. And once again, the church started to peel and started to be kind of not looking great. And so I walked up to the fathers of the church, and I said, listen, guys, why don't we restore it back to the way it was originally? And they said, great, go ahead. Well, I don't know where the hell to start. I called every art institution I could think of. I called the University of Texas, and they said, great, go ahead, good luck, Godspeed. We had one picture, and we knew that there were angels above each pillar. And so what I did after Mass, we set up the scaffolding, went up and used various means to remove. And it was like an archaeological find. A lot of you found a finger, you did that, it would resemble something. So I found what appeared to be an angel. And so we put it all back together again, and I painted the angels exactly back to the way you see them today. I painted all 6 of the angels. And what's interesting is, while we were working there, I just didn't get around to the last one. We were tired, and it was amazing, because how these things start. I guess legends, or whatever you want to call it. I was reading a magazine from Ohio, of all places, and they said the reason that last angel isn't painted, because there is a Czech custom that says you never completely finish the job, which is absolute bull. So I went up there a couple of weeks later, and I decided to do something different. I was going to paint it red. So I painted it red, and of course, people start saying, well, that's the fallen angel. But saying that being what it is, we finished the angels, and during that period of time, the congregation came in, and as you know, stencils are repetitive, so all you have to do is just take a portion of it. So we took a portion of it, got Mylar, and then the entire congregation came together. What we did is we took the angels that were already painted, we covered them with paper, and then we had a professional painter come in and spray paint the entire church. By this time, of course, we already have Mylar copies of all of the stencils. So at that time, the entire congregation came back, and they put the stencils back exactly the way that you see it today. The church now, Rob Marshall's people came in about 10 years ago and put the stars back up on the ceiling. The church is exactly the way it was when it was built in 1911. And so, like I said before, we're very proud of the church. If nothing else, we did all the work ourselves, and that's it. I can go on forever and talking about Dubina, but I know we had 15 minutes, and so I didn't want to take up. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing. I'd be digressive not saying this. Hey, it's time for a commercial. I have a brand new book. It's a brand new book, and it's called Dubina, A Place of Freedom and Hope, It's 350 pages long. My wife and I put it together. It's a labor of love. God, it was just so much fun. There's over 300 pictures in here. And if you are interested in purchasing it, it's not only about Dubina. It talks about Czech cultures. It talks about Texas history and a lot of weird stuff in there, murders and things of that nature. Go to dubinatexas.com. dubinatexas.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And we will also include a mention of that in that follow-up email that I told you guys that we would send out. So don't worry. If you didn't catch that, don't worry. It'll be in my email follow-up. Ed, thank you so much. That was incredible. And I don't know if I did a good job of advancing the slides while you were talking, but I will include those slides in my follow-up email. There is a picture of the hurricane damage in there and some other things. So just look for that. Thank you, Ed. And so now we're on to our third speaker, and then we'll do some Q&A. So Anthony, you are on.
Thank you very much. And I want to say how honored I am to be a part of this talk, because the two previous gentlemen are really VIPs in the world of painted churches. The work they've done is incredible and important. And of course, I've interviewed them for my book. And so you can learn more about both of those churches whenever I get around to publishing that book. I am going to start sharing my screen. If this works, great.
Looks good.
Great. As Bob actually said in the first painted church presentation a month or two ago, on June 21st, 1983, 15 Texas churches were listed in the National Register of Historic Places under the designation Churches in Texas with Decorative Interior Painting. Now, that means this is the 40th anniversary of that listing, but of course, these churches are all, almost all more than 100 years old. So we start with that. I also want to note that Kirk Weddle took all the photos in the book, including this one. And this evening, I'm going to be talking to you very briefly about three different churches of three different denominations in three different parts of Texas, including St. Cyril and Methodius Catholic Church, only this one is in Shiner, not in Dubina. This church is about 90 miles east of San Antonio and comes with some lingering questions. Shiner was originally called Half Moon, and it's actually been around since about 1885. Many Czechs and Germans settled in the area in the late 19th century. The church was completed in 1921 at the cost of about $125,000, and I think they got their money's worth. The blessing of the church was such an enormous event, it attracted more than 7,000 people, and Shiner only had a population of about 1,300 at the time. The architect was named James Warrenberger, and you can see what a lovely grand space he designed in the Romanesque revival style. I don't think this church was painted immediately following construction, but by 1923, local papers were identifying William Fred Donaker of San Antonio as the sole painter. By then, Donaker had a solid reputation as a church painter in and around San Antonio. The vivid blue spandrel with paintings of angels is certainly the most striking thing you see when you first walk in, but it was never mentioned in the 1920s. The only artwork that was actually mentioned by name was the fresco or mural that you can see directly below that center arch. The fresco was called Jesus in the Garden of Olives. I actually reached out to Robert Marshall a couple weeks ago about that mural because its history isn't quite clear. It may in fact not be Donaker's work, And here are some clues. Although the line you see running down this fresco is water damage, there is also, in my opinion, differences in color saturation and the level of detail from one side to the other. In September 1928, Father Notardus of St. Cyril and Methodius told the Shiner Gazette that, quote, "This parish is being refrescoed." But I don't know what that means. The following month, in October 1928, the same paper stated that Donneker is responsible for the, quote, "handsome paintings," unquote, in the church. Suddenly things are plural, but it never mentions who did the refrescoing or what it is or what the other paintings are. Possibly that meant Donneker added the vivid blue sky with clouds on the ceiling, or possibly the angels in the spandrel. But I can't find documentation about the artwork in the church until 1953, when the church began extensive renovations. The Victoria Advocate stated, quote, "Edmund Faggio, nationally known interior decorator from Chicago, will redo all the furnishings, altar statues, stations of the cross, pews, pedestals, and the pulpit." In early 1954, the same paper reported that Faggio had, quote, "finished all the artwork of the church's altars and statuary. The artist decorated the statues and stations of the cross in their true traditional colors." But it says nothing about the mural or the fresco. Today, the mural is called Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is the same place as the Garden of Olives. But what has not been determined is whether Donneker's original mural was even still present when Faggio began working. And so we don't know if Faggio restored Donneker's original mural and then possibly expanded it, which might explain the differences in color, or if Faggio painted over Donneker's work completely in favor of his own. Now, I aim to get to the bottom of these mysteries for the book, including who did this stenciling that is seen throughout the church. I am still actively researching this church, and so let me plead to you, if anyone out there has any information about St. Cyril and Methodius in Shiner, especially photographs before 1953, find a way to reach out to me, because these are mysteries that we need to figure out. Either way, let's just move on to a charming country chapel with its own lingering mystery. The Wesley Brethren Church sits in between Houston and Austin. It was built in 1866 as the first church in Texas and North America for the unity of the Brethren, which is a Protestant denomination that was formed back in 1457 in Bohemia. This church was built by Czechs and Germans. In fact, it was the congregation itself that designed and built it. Inside the one-room wood-framed church, the artwork was done by one man, Reverend Boleslav Emil Lassu, who served as pastor of the church for only a few short years, from about 1885 to 1891, but he transformed the building's interior in an intensely personal way. He was also a teacher, and tradition has it that he would give lessons to his Czech students in their language, and then he would do the same for his German students in their language, and then he'd climb atop a scaffold and would paint for the rest of the day. The blue painted ceiling is faded and aged, but it serves as a pleasant canvas for a dynamic black and white border design. It frames the entire ceiling. You can see the elaborate interlocking geometric designs here. On the walls, he not only painted bricks with mortar in between, but he added what looks like Roman Tuscan columns to provide a more grand illusion of the size of the church. Both the fake brick and the columns went all the way up to the ceiling, where he was diligent enough to include the small details of the volute. It was charmingly executed, though not too professional. These nails are important historically because until the mid-20th century, this church, as well as nearly every other church in Texas, segregated the men from the women. If you were a man, you looked for these nails because that's where you hung your hat, and then you sat on that side. Now, here's the lingering mystery. No one knows what all this really means. Reverend Lasso died in 1891 before he could finish his work. What's more, he left no notes, nor did he tell anyone what his grand plan was and what it was all about. We can only speculate and will likely never know what his ultimate intentions were. Some members of the church itself believe that the columns and the brick walls were intended to look something like Solomon's temple, giving an illusion of a larger, grander space. The intricate design on the ceiling may indicate that there are so many different lines or denominations within the Christian church, but even when they're tough to discern, they are all connected. We don't really know, though, because there can be seen on the ceiling some pencil etchings where he was planning to add more before he died. Personally, I think having children in the church while he was painting was really significant and the main inspiration behind whatever he was doing. It had to be bold and compelling and eye-catching because the students were the ones to grow up in this church and carry on the faith. Since a second larger church was built nearby in 1963, this one still stands in nearly the exact same condition as it did in 1891. It is still on occasion used for special occasions. But since the question of the painting will likely never be answered, let's all just go to Paris. In Paris, Texas, about 90 miles northeast of Dallas, the First United Methodist Church is nearing its century mark. And gratefully, we know just about everything we need to about this church. The magnificent and impressive steel and limestone church was completed in April 1924 with 3 stories, including the dome, and a full basement. Full basements are very rare in Texas. The architecture has often been compared to certain Renaissance-era villas built in northern Italy. Inside the 1,650-seat sanctuary, there are magnificent arches and over 100 stained glass windows, but its natural focal point is the hexagonal clerestory overhead, which is directly beneath the red tile dome. One of the church's architects, Elmer Van Slyke, designed the elaborate stained glass inset. You can also see the 3-dimensional plaster moldings, which are consistently repeated throughout the entire sanctuary. Here, it's a little easier to see the Easter lily motif, especially close to the center. I believe Elmer Van Slyke thought the flowers were an especially important part of the theme of the church because they are also found stenciled and freehand painted throughout the sanctuary. Here you can see more of the elaborate plaster molding, as well as the painted lilies just above. And here you can see everything in context: stained glass, plaster moldings, pink lilies in the corners, and the freehand painting of a traditional Christian image, the burning lamp, which represents the Holy Scriptures. It comes from Psalms 119, verse 105, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet." Another traditional icon is the heart with thorns atop an anchor and a cross, which symbolizes the crucifixion. There are also paintings of a musical instrument called a lyre, which praises and rejoices in God with music, and an open Bible, obviously a symbol of relaying the word of God through scripture. This stencil with broken lines, crosses, and crests can also be found throughout the sanctuary. Stenciling is a major aspect of all the painted churches in Texas. It was for continuity of the art as much as it represented individual choices made by the artists in conjunction with the churches. No stencils are the same in any church throughout Texas. So as I conclude, wrapping up, saving time, let me just say that throughout Texas, there may be up to 30 or 35 of these historic treasures. Although new churches are being painted in the old way, and as Robert and Judge Ed said, older churches are being restored. True to their historic nature, though, some, but not all, remain slow to give up their secrets. These are real treasures. The painted churches reflect religious, artistic, and cultural legacies dating back to just after the end of the Civil War. My time is up, but I just want to say the book is still being written, and hopefully it will be published by Texas A&M University Press sometime next year. And before I go, I'd just like to say happy anniversary to my mom and dad.
Aw, happy anniversary to them. Are they on the call tonight?
They promised they would be, but you just never know.
I love that. Okay, I know there are a lot of questions. If you've not already put your question in the chat box, please go ahead and do so. And Anthony, whenever you're ready, if you can, I think you're trying to figure out the stop share
So
thing.
trying to figure that out.
That's okay. Keep working on that. If we don't get to all of your questions in the time that we have left, I will, like I said, be sending out that email, and you can reply to me there, and we'll figure out who can answer your question. I neglected to introduce Bob Brinkman. Bob, I'm so sorry about that. Anthony, are you still having trouble?
I think I'm here.
You're here, but if you can do stop share so that we're seeing your desktop.
Oh, I'm stopping video. I don't know where I stop share. Oh, stop share.
Yay, thank you. Bob Brinkman works at the Texas Historical Commission, and he was our speaker for part one of these presentations about the painted churches. So I want to call you also the know-it-all over at THC as far as the painted churches go. That may not be the right title, but he is also here and helping to answer questions. So thank you for being here, Bob. And sorry I did not introduce you at the beginning.
That's okay.
Okay, so let me scroll up to the top, get to the questions. Okay, Maureen is asking were images painted on canvas and then the canvas was glued to the ceiling? Robert, is that how it?
No, it was actually painted on the ceiling. Some of it was painted down below and then attached, but most of it was done on the ceiling.
So the canvas was on the ceiling and they were painting
Right.
on it.
Then they
That's a good
painted the
question.
canvas and then they did their design and painted it on. Yes.
Great, thank you so much.
Many paintings were also done directly on the walls themselves. So
Great.
the ones on canvas tend to be saved better than the ones on the walls, but they were actually done in both ways.
Good to know. I'm mystified by how we could restore canvas or the paintings on the walls. That process looks incredibly difficult to me. Deanne has a question more in line with how do we even get a community going to restore a church like this? She's saying, I'd love to know how you got funding for the restoration. Judge Ed, maybe that's a question that you can speak to. How do you get a community together, and where do you find funding? How do you make it happen?
Well, let me tell you what, quite honestly, it didn't cost anything. I mean, from the standpoint, I say anything, maybe a couple of less than $1,000. I mean, we had to get the church painted by professional people. That probably cost $500-600 or whatever. But we just bought paint, that squeezes out a little tube and you put it on the thing, and it was very, very cheap because we were doing the labor ourselves and it was free. So, yeah, you just get everybody together and you say, do that, do that, do that, and everybody took their part. I must mention also that since I've mentioned the church, St. Cyril and Methodius has been designated a shrine by Bishop here in Victoria, so it's a big deal. It's the oldest St. Cyril Methodius church in Texas.
Wow. Yes. So Deanne, I know you're asking about purchasing the old train depot there, and that's a slightly different animal than talking about the painted churches. But I think the idea that Judge Ed is mentioning here, this idea of volunteerism and motivating your community and then seeing what the needs are, is probably still true regardless. And I know you have another question similar to that further on about funding, but we'll get there in a sec. Lauren is asking, is the gold a form of metal leaf?
Yes. It is gold. It's truly gold. John, grab a box. We'll show. The gold is nearly 100% pure.
Wow.
You're looking at 23.75 carat. 24 carat is pure. It's very malleable, so they can make it extremely thin. And that's fine. You can show it to them. But anyway, my assistant John is pulling out some leaf. We have what's called patent leaf here. It's literally attached to a piece of paper.
Oh yeah.
And then put onto to wherever it is that you're putting it. And here's a full sheet right here that I just damaged. But you're looking at less than 1/10 the thickness of a human hair.
Oh wow.
So, and that's the thicker gold is that thick. So
That
we
must
did
be.
we do work all over the country. We just finished up a giant sculpture of Mary in Maryland, where we used very thick gold for gilding, because she's about 26 foot tall and she's 100 foot up, and it's hard to get to repair. So we've made sure we had a nice thick gold up there.
It looks like it's very hard to work with. I noticed in the picture of the woman that was working with that she had it in her hair, and it was,
yeah, it blows around. You need
everywhere.
to know how to do it, and it takes a little practice before you stop wasting it. And in the case at the church, it was very difficult because anytime somebody would open a door or something, it would blow away from you and float around the room. So
wow.
what she was doing, what she probably did, was caught it and put it in her hair
To hold it.
to hold it, and then came
Yeah.
back later and took it out.
That makes sense. Good idea. Needs must, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a question about, did you have an architect or a structural engineer involved? And I'm not sure who that question is being
Patrick
asked to. I think you.
Patrick Sparks was the engineer at St. Mary, and I suggested him to the church long before we did any work. As a matter of fact, I consulted with them back in about 2004, and it wasn't until 2009 that they were done with everything that Patrick had suggested they do. And then they brought me in, and I told them it was senseless to, restore paintings on a wall that were just going to continue to keep cracking. So
Exactly. That makes total sense. I think this next question is about the Dubina, the church in Dubina. It's when was the church originally painted? Do we know that date?
Yeah, 1919.
Thank you. And then there's a question, I'm not sure if I understand it, but maybe you all will understand it. What level RH do y'all aim for within the church?
relative humidity inside the church,
Ah, thank you.
I like to have it be right around 50% plus or minus, but that's almost impossible. So you turn on the heat, the RH goes down, and Judge, you know this very well. it depends on whether they use the AC or the heater. So if they use the furnace, if they use the AC, that can help maintain things. If they don't, then it's not maintained at all.
And then someone's asking about the stained glass windows. Was there any restoration or conservation done on the stained glass windows?
Which church?
I know, I'm not sure.
St. Mary in High Hill, yes, they restored all the stained glass.
Does the church in
It's
Dubina?
done. It's done kind of many times. It can be re-leaded, and they can just simply be cleaned. But stained glass doesn't last forever with its colors, so it does periodically need to be refreshed.
In Dubina, we are, as they say, hudobni moravets, and nemame penis. We didn't have the money for that like the rich folks did. So ours are just beautiful, but they don't have any stained glass in them.
Gotcha.
It's typically 100 years for a stained glass window to have the lead needing to have service done to it.
Mm.
I have a
Stained
lot
glass
of-
windows feels like a whole other presentation. We're going to have to do it another time.
There
I'm
are
sure
several
there's so
good ones
much.
in Texas too.
Yeah. Let's see. Other questions. Let me scroll down. Bob, thank you for answering the one about the Moravia. A lot of compliments, by the way, to our presenters and interest in getting the book, Judge Ed. So we'll definitely send out a link to that. And then here's Deanne's second question. She's asking, did any of you apply for grants to help fund the restorations, or do you rely on local volunteers?
That's up to the owners. You know,
No.
we, as Judge Ed was saying, Ed, you were saying you had mostly volunteers, right?
Yeah, everything was done by the local parishioners when we did our stuff, and there was no cost except for like buying the paint in the tubes and just telling people where in the hell to go and do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my part of Dubina that I did, you know, we donated a lot of the metal leaf for the stars and what have you. So
Let me just mention this. There is one little section in Dubina when we were working there in the 1980s, and I noticed where it was at. It was right into the church, and we just didn't get around to it because we were just tired and stuff. And now we have uncovered some portions of that, so we plan on finishing that project completely here in the next maybe 6 months.
yeah. And we're hoping to go there and help. So,
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you can maybe cut your price down a little bit. How we can talk, you know.
I need a field trip also, so if I can come visit as well, I can help out.
Rob and I go way back. We were working on the courthouse together in LaGrange. It's a J. Riley Gordon courthouse. It's the only courthouse in the state of Texas that has a atrium. So it was great fun.
It's very neat. Deanne, I wanted to follow up. If you have specific questions and there's anything that I can connect, anything I can do, maybe I can connect you with someone at the Texas Historical Commission who can answer questions for you. Please email me, respond to my email when I send out my follow-up, and I'll see if I can help you at all. Let's see. Lisa Liu is asking, this may have been covered in part 1. What was it custom to paint rural churches in Moravia to emulate larger churches, or was the practice established here?
Let me answer that. First of all, it's Moravia. And yes, it was, I mean, it's a touch of feeling home is what it amounts to. So when you start looking around at all these churches that were built here, almost every single one of them had stenciling in it. The church in LaGrange, the church in Hosting, the church in Cistern, all of these places had stenciling all over. For whatever reason, they tore down the church or whatever, and Hosting had a beautiful, it was identical to the one in Dubina, and they tore it down and built, and unfortunately it burned down. But I understand now that they're going to try to rebuild or make it look similar to the first church and put the stenciling back. But yes, to answer your question, it just reminded them of home in Moravia.
I think we did have a similar question to that in part 1 regarding that. Thank you. And Elias, I see your question, but I'm not sure what the question is. It just says, have you checked Greek Orthodox churches? I'm not quite sure what that question is, but if you want to retype it in the chat, maybe give me a little clarity when we'll ask your question for you. Next question is, are any of the churches open during the week for a tour? Who could we contact about that? Would probably be a good.
Most of the churches are living, working churches, so you should consider that if you're going to visit. Many of them can arrange a tour for you. The ones down around Dubina, Schulenburg, High Hill, they actually have tour groups that will arrange tours of 4 or 5 different churches. But most of them have no problem with visitors, but you should be aware that there could be services at the time.
Dubina Church is open every morning and it's closed around 6 or 7 in the evening. And we have just built brand new bathrooms. They look like Taj Mahal. You guys come out and take a look at the church and use the bathrooms. Hell of a deal.
Yeah, it's always good to remember to, honor the places that we're visiting and respect the services that are going on there and the uses of those spaces. So thank you for mentioning that, Anthony. Yes, the question about part 1, I will include a link to viewing part 1 when I send out my email. So no worries about that. And Michael, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to ask the question in the chat? We're kind of going through the chat there.
I had a quick response to the High Hill tour.
Okay,
It's
go
open on
ahead.
Sundays around a 10:15 mass. It's open during the week, and you can contact the city of Schulenburg for a docent.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I wonder, could we find that contact information on the city's website of a Chamber of Commerce or?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Exactly.
great. Okay, what was the cost of the restoration at St. Mary's?
I think that's more private, wouldn't you say? It's a matter of the church to decide whether they want to divulge that.
Yeah, I don't think we have any representatives here tonight that could speak to
Right.
that, unfortunately. Yeah, a question for another time and another day.
It was over $200.
It definitely was over $200.
More than a tube of paint.
When you have 9 people working for 13 months and then all that material and everything we did, luckily for us, they have some well-off parishioners that took care of everything.
Michael, who we just heard from, is asking, will St. Mary's be open Labor Day Sunday? Anyone want to docent tours?
I think that is their holiday. They actually have a celebration on Labor Day, don't they, Judge?
Yeah, that's their church picnic. And yes, the church will be open. They won't be giving tours, I wouldn't imagine, unless you can maybe grab one of the local folks around there, but they'll be too busy either in the beer stand or handing out chicken or doing something. But that's
Yeah, that's a good picnic to go to. You need to go there and spend some money.
Yep.
Go buy something at the auction you don't need.
And every one of these little churches has a picnic, which they raise money. And Dubina's is always on the first Sunday in July, and we have just finished ours. Thank God it's over. Sorry. Well,
Events can be hard, I understand.
it was very hot and whatever.
So we've reached the end of the questions that are in the chat. Does anyone else in our audience want to come off mute and make a comment or ask a question of our presenters? Please feel free to do that now. Oh, someone's asking which picnic has the best fried chicken.
No, listen, hands down. I'm not kidding you about this. It is hands down. Dubina has the best fried chicken. Let me tell you why. Dubina takes their chicken, and first what they do is every evening before the church and before Sunday, we actually go through and we cut off all of the fat of all the stuff that's hanging down. Then we put them and we soak them and put them in the freezer or cooler. And then the next morning they take eggs and a little bit of milk and flour, and they wrap it up, and then they put cracker crumbs on there. Now, it's not cracker crumbs that you buy in the store. We have to physically get there the day before that and grind the darn thing so they are the right consistency for the ladies that have been doing it since 1912. The point is, it is the best fried chicken anywhere, and I'll, anybody can come up and I'll tell you how, yes.
Yes. Lots of people in the chat are saying I need to take a visit and go see. So yes, we encourage that. Definitely go see these churches and travel around Texas and get to know Texas history. There's so much to know. If you don't know already, the THC has a very cool app that you can put on your phone, and as you're driving around, you can look for places to visit. And I'll put a link to that as well in the follow-up email that I have. But
Can I caution you about one thing? It's just quite
yes,
I consider myself somewhat of a historian, and it really bothers me when I hear people give presentations about Dubina or whatever and have no idea what they're talking about, and they change it and stuff. And I'm not really pushing the book, but if you want to know what really was going on in Dubina, get something that's written down and you can do it. I'll give you an example. In Texas highways, not too long ago, there's a wonderful bridge down the road called the Piano Bridge, and it's gorgeous. It's comes over and anyway, somewhere in the thing they said the reason it's called Piano Bridge is because it was made from piano wire. And I was thinking, are you serious? Could anybody actually put that in? Whatever. So there you are. That's just a little minor.
Yeah, you got to beware.
Yeah.
yes, need to do your research. Talk to the folks who know.
Buy the book,
Buy the book, exactly. Buy the book.
right, Judge? Buy the book.
Come by and see me. We'll talk for an hour. Thank y'all very much.
This has been absolutely wonderful, and there are so many compliments in the chat. I just can't read them all to you, but trust me, there was a great amount of interest in this topic, and I have to tell you, we had one of our highest audience counts so far. So 142 people at one point chiming in tonight to listen to you guys, and we are so grateful for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Marshall, and
Bye,
thank you, Judge
everybody.
Ed, and thank you, Anthony. And look for my follow-up email, and I will talk to you all later. See you at the next virtual event. Goodbye.
So long.